Around the World in 80 Days, by Jules Verne, Chapter 3, in which a conversation takes place which seems likely to cost Phileas Fogg dear. Phileas Fogg, having shut the door of his house at 11:30, and having put his right foot before his left 575 times, and his left foot before his right 576 times, reached the Reform Club, an imposing edifice in Pall Mall, which could not have cost less than 3 millions. He repaired at once to the dining room, the 9 windows of which open upon a tasteful garden, where the trees were already gilded with autumn colouring, and took his place at the habitual table, the cover of which had already been laid for him. His breakfast consisted of a side dish, a broiled fish with Reading sauce, a scarlet slice of roast beef garnished with mushrooms, a rhubarb and gooseberry tart, and a morsel of Cheshire cheese, the whole being washed down with several cups of tea, for which the Reform is famous. He rose at 1:13, and directed his steps towards the large hall, a sumptuous apartment adorned with lavishly framed paintings. A flunkey handed him an uncut Times, which he proceeded to cut with a skill which betrayed familiarity with its delicate operation. The perusal of this paper absorbed Phileas Fogg until about 4:15, whilst the Standard, his next task, occupied him till the dinner hour. Dinner passed as breakfast had done, and Mr. Fogg reappeared in the reading-room, and sat down to the Pall Mall at 20 minutes before 6. Half an hour later several members of the Reform came in and drew up into the fireplace, where a coal fire was steadily burning. They were Mr. Fogg's usual partners at whist, Andrew Stewart, an engineer, John Sullivan and Samuel Fellentin, bankers, Thomas Flanagan, a brewer, and Gauthier Ralph, one of the directors of the Bank of England, all rich and highly respectable personages, even in a club which compromises the princes of English trade and finance. "Well, Ralph," says Thomas Flanagan, "what about that robbery?" "Ooh," replied Stewart, "the bank will lose money."
"On the contrary," broke in Ralph, "I hope we may put our hands on that robber. Skilful detectives have been sent to all the principal ports of America and the continent, and he'll be a clever fellow if he slips through their fingers."
"But you haven't got the robber's description," asked Stewart.
"In the first place, he's no robber at all," returned Ralph positively.
"What? A fellow makes off with £55,000, no robber?"
"No."
"Perhaps a manufacturer, then?"
"The Daily Telegraph says that he's a gentleman."
It was Phileas Fogg, whose head now emerged from behind his newspapers, who made this remark. He bowed to his friends, and entered into the conversation. The affair which formed its subject, which was now town talk, had occurred 3 days before at the Bank of England. A package of banknotes to the value of £55,000 had been taken from the principal cashier's table, that functionary being at the moment engaged in registering the receipt of 3 shillings and 6pence. Of course, he could not have his eyes everywhere. Let it be observed that the Bank of England reposes a touching confidence in the honesty of the public. There are neither guards nor gratings to protect its treasures. Gold, silver, banknotes are freely exposed, and at the mercy of the first comer. A keen observer of English customs relates that, being in one of the rooms of the bank one day, he had the curiosity to examine a gold ingot weighing some 7 or 8 pounds. He took it up, scrutinized it, passed it to his neighbour, he to the next man, and so on until the ingot, going from hand to hand, was transferred to the end of a dark entry, nor did it return to its place for a half-hour. Meanwhile the cashier had not much as raised his head, but in the present instance of things had not gone so smoothly. The package of notes had not been found when 5 o'clock sounded from the ponderous clock in the drawing office. The amount was passed to the account of profit and loss, and as soon as the robbery was discovered, picked detectives hastened off to Liverpool, Glasgow, Havre, Suez, Brisbane, New York, and other ports, inspired by the proffered reward of £2,000 and 5% on the sum that might be recovered. Detectives were also charged with narrowly watching those who arrived at or left London by rail, and a judicial examination was once entered upon. There were real grounds for supposing, as the Daily Telegraph said, that the thief did not belong to a professional band. On the day of the robbery, a well-dressed gentleman of polished manners and a well-to-do air had been observed going to and fro in the paying-room where the crime was committed. A description of him was easily procured and sent to the detectives, and some hopeful spirits, of whom Ralph was one, did not despair of his apprehension. The papers and clubs were full of the affair, and everywhere the people were discussing the probabilities of a successful pursuit, and the Reform Club was especially agitated, several of its members being bank officials. Ralph would not concede that the work of the detectives was likely to be in vain, for he thought that the prize offered would greatly stimulate their zeal and activity. But Stewart was far from sharing this confidence, and, as they placed themselves at the whist table, they continued to argue the matter. Stewart and Flanagan played together, while Phileas Fogg had Fellenton for his partner. As the game proceeded, the conversation ceased, excepting between the rubbers where it revived again. "I maintain," said Stewart, "that the chances are in favour of the thief, who must be a shrewd fellow."
"Well, where can he fly to?" asked Ralph. "No country safe for him." "Pshaw! Where could he go, then?"
"Oh, I don't know that. The world is big enough."
"It was once," said Phileas Fogg in a low tone.
"Cut, sir," he added, handing the cards to Thomas Flanagan. The discussion fell during the rubber, after which Stewart took up its thread. "What do you mean by once? Has the world grown smaller?" "Certainly," returned Ralph. "I agree with Mr. Fogg. The world has grown smaller, since a man can now go around it 10 times more quickly than 100 years ago, and that's why the search for this thief will be more likely to succeed. And also why the thief can get away more easily.